Hi, I'm Kit Bowen.
And my name is Ryan T. Husk, and this is the Creation Entertainment Podcast. All right, we start off today's episode with our co-CEO, Adam Malin, interviewing actor Paul Wesley about his upbringing and early roles, culminating with The Vampire Diaries.
And then for the Pop Culture Cinema Squad, Adam is joined by Craig Byrne to talk about this year's Superman movie and the franchise as a whole.
Those two guys can talk Superman, let me tell you. It's pretty fun.
Well, Craig is like the premier Superman guy. So
I know,
yeah,
this is great.
It'll be fun.
All right, everybody. So stick around, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Creation Entertainment Podcast.
Hi, folks. I'm Adam Malin. Welcome to the Creation Entertainment Podcast interview. And today we have a very special guest. Please welcome Paul Wesley. Paul, buddy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Adam. I've known you for many, many years, and I am honored and thrilled to be here with you.
It's great, buddy. We love you. And, I know a bit more about your career than some of our viewers, and I'm fascinated by it for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that I'm a huge theater fan, and people don't realize you have some real strong theater schooling. But let's kind of, Paul, dive back to the beginning, to your humble roots in beautiful New Jersey.
Yes, sir.
Right. Tell me a bit about your parents and kind of growing up in New Jersey. I, of course, I'm a New York boy, so I have nothing but love and admiration from my New Jersey brothers.
It's nice to hear that because every time someone asks me where I'm from and I say New Jersey, I say New York area because I moved to Manhattan when I was 13. Like, well, where? And I'm like, well, I grew up in New Jersey. Oh, get out of here! Bridge and tunnel, bridge and tunnel. It's all said as an in joke and jest. But no, thank you. I mean, I had a really pretty great childhood, Adam, because I grew up in a suburban environment, with two really supportive and awesome parents, immigrants from Poland, from Warsaw, immigrated here when my father went to school, went to college in the United States, and that's how he ended up here. But I grew up 45 minutes south of Manhattan. So what was great about where I grew up is that I was able to sort of have the sort of cultural experience of New York City while living in a fairly sort of routine American suburban life with, being able to ride I always said motorcycle, my bicycle around the neighborhood. I grew up in New Jersey, spent a lot of my childhood going to Poland actually as well, because my mother's parents still lived there. My whole family was there other than essentially my mom and dad. My older sister and my dad's mom had actually immigrated to Chicago, but we spent a fair deal of my childhood, particularly in the summers, like 3 to 4 months a year in Poland, traveling Poland with my grandparents. So I had a bit of a duality as a child, the sort of American experience and also the sort of Eastern European experience. So I'm sort of both, I suppose.
It's an amazing background. Paul, did your parents or grandparents carry any of the legacy of the disaster that Poland went through during World War II?
Oh goodness, yeah, it's a huge part of my existence. I my grand well my on my mother's side, much more sort of tragic. My mother's grandfather was a Austrian Jew who was killed in a concentration camp,
Oh,
and sort of learned about his history, what happened to him a little bit later in my life, in my teens. I suppose it was still, when I in the 80s, I was born in 82, it was still communist regime, and there was still in Poland, and there was still kind of a sort of sense of not wanting to really fully admit even this fear, even though it was many, many years after the war had obviously ended. But I didn't find out really about I don't know if they were sheltering it from me or what, but I didn't really find out about my family's sort of Jewish history until I was in my teens, early teens. Um, and my grandfather, who pretty much raised me alongside my parents, both of my grandparents on my mother's side kind of raised me alongside my parents, and they my grandfather was also arrested, and he was in a essentially a prison as a teenager, Nazi prison. They let him go, and he then fought in the resistance. And I have an incredible book I'll show you one day of my grandfather. There happened to be a documentary photographer who was following around his small guerrilla resistance group throughout the forests of Poland as they were staging, attacks on the Nazis and trying to fight back. And I
That's
have these
incredible.
unbelievable photos of my grandfather
Your
in,
granddad was a Polish freedom fighter, and it's amazing,
yeah,
Paul. And by the
yeah.
way, Paul, my grandfather was Polish, so I'm half Polish myself, and he
Hmm.
emigrated from Poland around 1913.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow.
they were he met my grandma who was from Russia around 1915. She got out of
Wow.
Russia just before the Russian Revolution. So
Wow.
my legacy is that my grandparents had escaped all the trauma of Europe during the
Mm,
World Wars and Russia during the Revolution. They got out and got to America before all that, which is just an incredible
wow.
twist of fate. But the
Wow.
legacy that your family carries, it's an important part of what you are. And I think,
Mhm.
honestly, those kind of roots are what shaped you into the mensch that you are. And I do call you that, a mensch in the highest of respectful terms, Paul. I've known you for a long time. The way that you conduct yourself, I mean, I think it's a reflection on your parents and your grandparents for sure, brother.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.
Listen, so when did you first kind of get, obviously you've worn many hats, but starting with acting, when did you first kind of get the acting bug? How-
I was always an ice hockey player, but and that was sort of like what I was deeply interested in. But we had some mandatory theater. But we had mandatory plays that we had to be in, regardless of whether we wanted to be in elementary school. And there was a teacher there named Mrs. Pollock, and I remember going in there, and she said, "Okay, let's have you sing, and we'll see if you're an alto or a soprano." And I ended up singing. She was like, "Wow, I love your voice." And I'm going to make you the lead in all of the plays. And so I was the Phantom in Phantom of the Opera. I was in Beauty and the Beast. I was all these different plays, and I was like, there was a part of me that was kind of embarrassed because I was like, oh, I'm an athlete. I'm not an actor, but I just fell in love with being on stage. And I remember in high school, I got kicked off the hockey team because I was in a bit of trouble and I ended up fighting with someone and they kicked me off the team and I kind of didn't have anything to do. And so I said, well, I'm going to join the theater program. And I started doing theater and I got cast as an understudy in The Mousetrap. and
Great
and
play.
yeah, great play. And I think I was playing Major Metcalf, and that's my first time that I really was able, and I was able to do a few performances, and I was like, wow, this is something I want to do. That point, my parents said, well, let's put him in some acting classes in New York City. And I started doing acting classes, fell in love with it even more, and an agent saw me there. And I did a little like theater workshop, a showcase, I should say. And he said, "Do you want to audition for some TV shows?" And I said, "Sure." And I think my third or fourth audition, I ended up booking the role, and it was on a soap opera.
Guiding
And
light, right?
actually, the first one I did was called Another World. And
Okay.
that show had been on for ages, decades. And then shortly after I joined, the show got canceled. And however, the producers of The Guiding Light had seen my performance and asked me to be on The Guiding Light. I auditioned for it opposite Brittany Snow, got the part, and I was on that show for a few years during my high school
I mean, it's
days.
amazing. I mean, as you may or may not know, I had a 6-year run with General Hospital working with ABC and the producers of General Hospital. We did the official General Hospital convention for 6 years.
I didn't know that.
I'm a lifetime soap dude, okay? I am proud of it. I make no apologies for it. And growing up, Guiding Light was my show. So you doing your gig on Guiding Light, I think it's amazing. I think we both have nothing but the utmost respect for actors that can pull soaps, the kind of dialogue that they have to pull, and how hard they work. And these are sincere, hardworking craftspeople,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
And what's crazy is so many of the people that were on the Guiding Light, but particularly people that I had worked with, ended up doing some incredible things. Brittany Snow obviously is quite an accomplished actress. The woman who played my sister, she was not my biological. She had adopted me on the show. Ended up winning an Emmy for playing Judy Garland in a series. Her name's Tammy Blanchard, and then she went on and won a Tony for Gypsy.
Distinguished
And
theater actress.
yeah, that's right. And so a lot of the people on the show actually ended up having quite like revered careers.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an incredible incubator for amazing talent. And I have
Yeah.
nothing but respect for that. But the work that you did in theater, we haven't had a chance to talk much about it, but I admire you so much for that. Now, and I've done a bunch of research, so sometimes my research is bad. So I apologize in advance long. But your first big theatrical work was Sensitive Skin.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was big, but I had done a movie. I'd done an independent film with a playwright slash screenwriter named Shem Bitterman, and but he was really known as a playwright, and he wrote a really beautiful script called Sensitive Skin, which was this gorgeous kind of four-hander, and he said, "Hey, you want to help me put this together?" And we found a small theater in LA. I believe it was called the Elephant Theater, and it was right there on Santa Monica Boulevard, and a pretty small theater. But we ended up doing that was my first like non, students play, I suppose, and really gave me a taste of theater in a different way.
But that was one of those black boxes, like the 99 seater.
That's right.
Yeah, but Sensitive Skin has a bit of notoriety in the industry, and it was an interesting story. It's kind of like
Yeah.
a triangle. You were sort of the ne'er-do-well brother. You had a brother that was sort of an overachiever, and it becomes a kind of a triangle about a stripper, which I thought is kind of an endearing
Yeah.
story, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then she ends up dying or getting very, very sick because, from what I recall, this was so many years ago. She was doing photography, and she would develop the photographs in a traditional way, but she wasn't using gloves. And then the chemicals from the photography is what made her sick. It's actually, I love the play so much, and we thought about adapting it into a feature. And I'm not sure nothing obviously transpired with that, but yeah, that was my first foray into like, yeah, film, theater.
It seems like a really endearing story to me, but
Yeah,
you also did a piece called Callan Camo.
yeah, yeah,
This was sort of this character Flint was a
yeah.
widower, so that's a whole nother kind of a take that you got to do. Tell me a little bit about that.
That was a really, it's funny because I was already on the Vampire Diaries, and people, there's a predisposition when you're on a CW show. It is what it is, there's a sort of, oh well, these guys can't act, they're just pretty boys, and they're in a YA drama. And I thought, well, let me try to break that mold. And I went in, I met with the director, and it was a small theater in the West Village called the Rattlestick, but they do some incredible plays. In fact, the play that I uh, um, uh, that was on prior to my play ended up it was called Ironbound, and it was written by a woman who ended up winning the Pulitzer. For Pulitzer, anyway, I forgot her name, Martina Mayak. Anyway, that was like one of her first plays. Her next play ended up winning, and that was a world premiere of that play. Point is, they are really good at finding some really good material. This was a world premiere. I read the script. I thought it was just so beautifully written. It's poetic, but deeply moving. And the character, he was yes, he was a widower, but he was also a very, very strange, very haunted, and sort of, on a surface level, you would look at Flint and you think something's wrong with him. He only wears these camouflage suspenders, and he lives in this trailer park in a flood zone with his wife. And at the opening of the play, we meet a couple who had just moved into this new town, and she gets a call that her brother, who she's sort of estranged from, his wife just drowned, and he's coming to stay with them. And that's the opening of the play. And I come in, and it's so beautiful because basically, I tried to save her from this flood zone, but she ended up drowning essentially, and she was in my arms. And at the end of the play, there's a flood, and I end up seeing this deer. And this deer I think the spirit of my wife is in this deer, and I try to save this deer. And I ended up saving this deer and holding this deer in my hands. And and I have this beautiful emotional breakdown. And it's just like this gorgeous play that they've then put on in several other theaters, I believe in Chicago. And it was just, I know reviews aren't everything, but I remember being like, oh my God, in New York City, New York Times is going to come. The head reviewer from the New York Times came in, Ben Brantley, and I was like, my God, I hope he doesn't say anything bad about me. And he ended up giving me a really good review and
You
really,
got great reviews at the time. I remember it, and also honestly, these kinds of cathartic tragedies, these character
yeah.
stories, I kind of live for them. I think
Mm,
they're awesome. And also, by the way, as a New York boy, Rattlesnake is a pretty prestigious village theater, so that's a
yeah.
great venue
Yeah.
to be.
Definitely. It's prestigious in a kind of understated way. And you can find some real gems. I mean, it's funny because when I was living in New York City full time, I made a goal of trying to see as many plays as possible. And I would see two or three plays a week. And I always found that the off-Broadway shows were so much. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some incredible stuff on Broadway. I just saw a play called Purpose. It was brilliant. But they always start somewhere, and they typically start off Broadway,
Yeah, New
and
York always
you,
the best, man.
yeah, Hamilton started off Broadway, and so you really can find some gems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's personally, I think that you cut your teeth and your chops and your craft working in that milieu, and you also develop a certain set of performance muscles that are unique to that, which
Yes.
will inform you as you go deeper into film and TV. And of course, TV is a completely different set of performance muscles. We're going to talk obviously a lot about Vampire Diaries, but before we do, and as well as your forays beyond acting into directing and such, but just to touching on a couple of the other shows that you did, and correct me if I've got these wrong, but you did Smallville?
Yeah, yeah, I did Smallville. So funnily enough, I just recently saw some clips from that. It was very funny. I had done a TV series for CBS that was short-lived and got canceled. One of the writers went on to be an executive producer writer on Smallville, and I get a call. They said, "They want to cast you." I didn't even audition for it. They said, "I want to cast you as Lucas Luthor, Lex's brother." And I was like, "Sure, let's go." And it was fantastic. And obviously, it's always tough to be a guest star, but I had the time of my life with it. I played this cocky, brash, almost interestingly enough, kind of like what people see the Captain Kirk as, but this cocky, brash, prodigal. I think the episode was called Prodigal Son. It was a return of the other son, and it was supposed to be a multi-arc actually recurring, but I ended up only doing one episode for some reason. I don't remember. I wasn't available. I don't remember what happened, but it was a really good episode. I just recently did Michael Rosenbaum's podcast. Michael played
Oh, yeah.
Lex Luthor, and we were talking about it, and it was a blast.
We do Smallville events, so we work
Oh, you
with,
do?
oh yeah, and we work with Michael and Tom a lot,
Yeah,
and that just seemed like a great ensemble to work with.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I had more to do with Michael than with Tom, obviously, but yeah,
How about John? Was John involved? John Glover involved with the episode?
yeah. John Glover played my father, and we had a ton of scenes together. A ton of
He's
scenes
something,
together.
isn't he something?
Oh yeah, very talented guy.
Yeah, we love him. So I wondered about that, and also 24. Did you get a shot at?
Yeah, it's funny. I had auditioned for 24 a few times in my career. Never got the parts, and didn't think anything of it. And I got a call one day, and they were like, "Hey, they're offering you a role." And I'm like, okay, and it was cool. As a young actor, you don't get a lot of offers, and I said, "Sure." Well, what is it? And they were like, "It's a small role, but it's a recurring. And it's to play Alicia Cuthbert's." Um, husband, and she's the daughter of Kiefer Sutherland, and
Yeah.
that was cool because it's such a legacy series, and it's so has a major impact on Fox and people. It's such a beloved show, and I was glad to be a part of that. I had a very small part, but was super glad to be a part of that legacy. Yeah.
Did you get to play against Kiefer at all, or
We did. I think we had a scene or two together. It was pretty. He was very professional. One of the things I noticed on 24 was really funny. So typically, when you're shooting a TV show, yeah, a lot of it is obviously shot out of order. And if you're doing a telephone call, which I would imagine a lot of the shows telephone calls, right? If you're doing a telephone call and someone else is on the other line, you're just reading it opposite a script supervisor. You're not. You're never reading it with the actual person because it's shot separately on totally different days. And I remember I had to get up at 6 in the morning to shoot my side of a phone call, and I get there. And Alicia Cuthbert's there, and she's in her, civilian clothing. I'm like, what are you doing here? You're not in this scene. And she's like, oh, no, no, this is a rule on 24. Kiefer set the rule. If there's a telephone call, the other person needs to be on set. The other person needs to be there on the day because it's a real actor that they want to work across. I'd never seen that on a TV series, and I was very impressed.
It's a remarkable series. I knew a bunch of those showrunners, and in fact, at the very end of the show's run, they there to their production offices where they all sit around drinking bourbon and smoking cigars.
Oh, oh, is that right?
And well, I was suffocating in the room, but
Yeah.
we were gonna run the official 24 convention, and that's
Oh,
when they pulled the plug on the show.
bummer. You
Yeah.
could, you could still do it. It's a beloved show, that's for sure.
It is a beloved show, but so leading into Vampire Diaries, which had such a profound impact on your career, you were already kind of in the CW stable. So what's the kind of vibe of sort of you're in the CW, and this, of course, is, and I speak of that in very positive terms. Since Nexstar bought CW, bastardized it, ruined it, and basically, killed the whole concept of the incredible incubator that CW had been and all the great shows and talent that came through CW in its prime. Um, how did it feel to sort of be a favored, member of the acting stable for CW? Did you recognize the vibe at the time?
Well, so prior to the CW being the CW, it was there was Warner Brothers in network, and there was UPN.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember Warner Brothers was like, my God, they had like Dawson's Creek, and they had all these like incredible shows. And I actually knew the president of Warner Brothers. His name was Garth Ancier. He's still a friend of mine. I haven't seen him in a while, but we're friendly. And anyway, I had done my first when I was 16 years old. Like my first pilot I ever got was actually a WB pilot, and it was one of those shows that kind of could have been big. It was the most expensive pilot actually filmed in WB history. Ended up not getting picked up. It was from Sean Pillar and Michael Pillar, big Star Trek folks actually.
Michael Pillar,
Anyway,
one of the greats.
yes, exactly. And anyway, the that was my first taste of the WB, and then I ended up testing for a variety of different shows, One Tree Hill, all these different things. I ended up not getting them, but I'd done some, Smallville. I did Everwood. I did a few things for the WB, so people knew who I was.
Yeah.
Um, Vampire Diaries came around, and I got to tell you, it wasn't like I was favored. I had to work my ass. I could barely get an audition for that show. I got an audition. They said, nah. Yeah, okay, bring him back. Okay, I think I read for that show about 15 times. I'm not even exaggerating. And it was a hard work. And I remember Gossip Girl was a hit. There was a few hits. And everyone got the feeling that because this was Kevin Williamson, and because Twilight had been such a huge
Yeah.
film in terms of just its success, we all kind of got this feeling that this might be the next big one, and boy, were they right. But yeah, I remember we were doing our first photo shoot for the CW, and the CW PR department said, you know, we have a feeling this is going to be big. We haven't felt anything like this since Dawson's Creek.
I mean, it's amazing. Those were heady days. And of course, as an actor, these days everybody does just self tapes. No, no, I don't think actors today
Mm,
necessarily recognize the
mm.
arduous process that you went through in those days to
Oh,
continually audition, meeting various steps and
mm,
levels of
hmm.
corporates and creatives until
It's
you
yeah.
finally, cross the gauntlet.
The psychological psychologically it's a challenge to say the least. I think, well, I actually went to a sports therapist before I ended up doing the Vampire Diaries screen test because I was so heady, and the therapy session actually helped me so much in understanding how to manage my nervousness, my sort of like reluctance. And I went in full steam and got the part, thanks to the sports therapist. Actually, a lot of people don't know that, but I have to tell you, I miss and also don't miss the days of live. auditions. I have to say there was something for me anyway. Everybody's different. Some people may prefer self tapes, but for me, there's something missing. For me, I feed off energy, and I walk into a room. And by the way, it could go one way or another. It could swing poorly, it could swing positively, but at least you had some reaction.
You're
I
playing
was
to
able, yes, and I was able to go into a room similar to theater. You're playing off the audience's energy.
yeah.
You kind of can go in and you can either steal that energy and own that energy and take control of that room. And it's undeniable that they have to give you the part. It's really hard to do that over a digital platform. It's really hard to create magic when you're doing a self tape. There's something missing. And I also don't like objectively looking at my performances after. I like to do it, and either I felt it or I didn't. Meanwhile, I'll do a self tape. I'll do it. I'll say I felt it, and then I watch it, and I'm like, oh, that could have been different. And you sort of start to analyze it and dissect it. And then by the time you send the final product, it's none of the kind of instincts that you had initially.
I mean, Paul, you're betraying your theater roots. A theater person with theater DNA always wants to play to an audience, play to a room, play into an environment, not just into a camera. So I think that your sensibilities about that are right. And I happen to agree with you about that. But you were collaborating with a couple of brilliant showrunners. I want to talk about Julie and I want to talk about Kevin. First, let's start with Kevin, the big kahuna. Just give me your reflections on Kevin Williamson.
Well, I remember I was auditioning for the role of Damon, which is the role that Ian got. And I was sitting in the waiting room. We all knew who Kevin Williamson was. Everyone knew Scream, Dawson's Creek. Everyone knew who Kevin Williamson. I even knew what he looked like. I didn't even met the guy. And I'm sitting I remember sitting in the hallway on the ground waiting to go in. I would always sit on the ground. Or I would pace. I never wanted to just sit in a chair. I felt like, what am I doing in this chair? So I was sitting on the ground and Kevin walked in, bunch of actors. And I remember he walked in and he just looked at me. He had a moment where he looked at me and then he went inside the room and I read for Damon and they liked me. They called me back and I came in and I did it again. And they were like, nah, he's not the right guy. He's too old and we don't know who we're going to cast as. Okay, fine. I never heard anything for like a month. And then I got a call. Hey, they cast a guy named Ian Somerhalder. He's 4 years older than you. They want you to read for Stefan. I was like, great, because that's the part I wanted anyway. I swear to God.
You're funny.
Anyway, I ended up getting the part and Kevin will admit this. And so will Julie. They weren't sold on me. They weren't sold on me as Stefan. In fact, they would have probably preferred to cast someone else. But Peter Roth, who was the president of Warner Brothers, said, I'm not making this show without Paul Wesley.
Wow.
He's the guy for this series. I don't care if he plays Damon. I don't care if he plays Steph. I don't care who he plays, but he needs to be in this part. And he strong armed, and we were about to shoot like in a week and a half, and he strong armed Julie and Kevin into giving me that part. And I kind of knew it. Like you can tell when the showrunners aren't 100%. But anyway, I get on set and I could tell like they weren't like, oh my God, we're so excited. They were like, okay, let's see how this goes, see how this goes. And I felt like my first week on set was an audition. I remember I shot my first scene with maybe it was my second scene with Nina Dobrev in the cemetery where we have this moment. And that's when everything changed. That was the moment I saw the producers behind the monitors and they were all watching and they were like, holy shit, this is going to work.
Yeah,
and everything changed.
I remember
And then
that early cemetery scene. You and Nina had amazing chemistry.
Yeah. And then I still was like, they do recastings after pilots and it's a whole thing. And I walked into ADR to shoot to do the voice record. We all have to do ADR after we shoot a pilot or a show to just, fix lines and audio. And I walked in and the director, Marco Ciego, was there and Kevin Williamson was there. And he goes, well, I was like, hey guys, and I grabbed the star. They're like, well, we hope you enjoy that Starbucks because that's the last time you walk into a Starbucks without people recognizing you. And I was like, oh, shut up. And they were like, no, we just tested Vampire Diaries to multiple live audiences, and your character tested the highest of any character on the entire series, and that's how they judge who's going to stay on the show or not. And my character tested the highest of anyone else. And I probably shouldn't say it sounds like I'm complimenting myself, but it was more that for me, it was an affirmation that I wasn't going to get killed off or recast and that I was actually going to stay on the show.
it doesn't come as a surprise to me. And I want to talk about your wonderful character, Stefan Salvatore. I just thought he was a fantastic character. But first,
Thank you.
reflections on the great Julie Plec, whom I just think
Julie. Yeah, Julie.
story, storyteller, showrunner, amazing person.
Yeah, Julie. Well, both Julie and Kevin have become very, very dear friends of mine. I adore them. Julie's. It's funny because Julie, when Julie was always the uh, she's the co-showrunner, she's the co-creator by all means, but it was Julie, you could tell, was kind of like Kevin was like the veteran who had created a bazillion shows, and Julie was like the young kind of aficionado in a way. But then once Kevin kind of took off, they were always working hand in hand, and I always find that like their compatibility is what made the show so magical, because Julie offers something unique and Kevin offers something unique, and that's why the show became what it was. And Julie then took over and was the showrunner for all of season 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. Well, actually, not. She stepped down. Someone else was showrunner, but regardless, she was showrunner for season 3, 4, 5 instead of a co-showrunner.
And she
And
kind of ran
season
the writer's room too, really, right?
Oh yeah. She would rewrite every script. I mean,
Yeah.
this was her life. This was Julie's life. And she was on set um every other week, and she got a place in Atlanta, Georgia. And I mean, she was like in it. And season 3 was for me, the best season for me, because I got to play the Ripper. I got to go from being the hero to the villain, and that was Julie was show running that, and that was my hands down my favorite season of the entire series.
I always thought it was fun that you could just kind of turn off your emotion chip
Yeah,
and kind of become become a villainous bad guy was a lot of
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Turn off my humanity.
there's so many things just kind of talk a little bit about Stefan Salvatore. He's such a complex and fascinating character with an incredible Civil War backstory.
Yeah. The flashback episodes on the Vampire Diaries to the 1860s,
So good.
during, I mean, those are the best,
So
in
good.
my opinion, because you really met these two brothers that were just a bunch of kids, and they ended up meeting a girl who changed their lives forever. And interestingly enough, as we told the story of the genesis of these brothers, you realize that actually fun Damon's the villain, but Stefan is the one who turned Damon into the villain,
Yeah.
which is such an interesting it subverts sort of the audience expectation, and you understand the origin of a quote unquote villain. They're
So
both as villainous in a way.
honestly, I look at both Damon and Stefan as innocents.
Yeah,
Catherine was the villain.
that's right. Yeah,
It was almost like the proverbial snake in the Garden of Eden. I felt like
yeah,
you
yeah,
were
yeah,
almost like Adam and Eve, the
yeah.
innocent, and you
Hmm.
were perverted by her and became what you were. But I always felt that the brothers never lost their moral center.
That's right.
Were actually
That's right.
very morally centered dudes that, were handed a raw deal and tried to pay forward being honorable guys under supernaturally awful conditions.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Um, you also got to play a few different characters on the show, Silas and Tom. So isn't it a lot of fun to kind of get out of your character, but be enough
Absolutely.
show and get a whole kind of a vibe?
Yeah, I mean, when you're doing 22 episodes a year, which is insane at this point, right? Nobody really does that anymore. Especially 1 hours of that quality and that sort of cinematic presentation. Yeah, it's hard to maintain the through line for the same character for 2022 a year. It's a lot of work. It's like 9.5 months out of the year. And so it was like this really nice break to play the Ripper, which, yeah, he's Stefan, but he's not Stefan. He's Stefan under drug haze in a way. And then Silas was this like comedic arch, but also kind of witty, this bizarre villain. I got to flex some of my comedic muscles. And then, Tom was just an episode, but it was like, I got to play a human, it was like, whoa, I'm just a human, just an ordinary guy, so it was like really fun. And funnily enough, I mean, not to jump ahead, but it's like, that's kind of what I get to do on Star Trek, because the show is so inventive, I get to play Kirk, in different timelines. I get to play different version of some version of another character on holodeck. I get to, but we jump around, and it's really challenging, and also just so nice to not have to have the monotony of doing the same thing.
I mean, it's great for your chops, but also, honestly, back in those days, it would be 22 episodes in a season. I don't even know how you
I
navigate.
don't know either. I
I
don't
mean,
either. I don't know how the writers break that down. How do you break down 22 hours of
a
television? It's
season.
insane.
I mean, it's like today,
Yeah.
today, 8 or 10 episodes is a heavy lift.
I totally agree. It's
So crazy.
crazy, man. It's
It's crazy.
crazy. Yeah.
Um, one of my favorite through lines of Vampire Diaries became its own series. I thought that the originals were
Mm.
so dynamic. Of course, the people like Joe and Daniel, so
Hmm.
talented and inventive. I felt like
Well,
they were a
yeah.
flash of energy that burned through the show when they
I mean,
arrived.
they were never supposed to. Feel free, Julie or Kevin, to call me and correct me if I'm wrong, but they were never going to get supposed to get their own spinoff. We introduced characters all the time, and you constantly have guest stars and recurrings coming in, and they had no idea whether that storyline was going to work. But I remember when Daniel Gillies got on set, and I was like, okay, he's elevating the show, he's elevating the series, and then they were like, we need to find a guy named Klaus. We need to find this guy named Klaus. We have to. He's the villain. He's the villain. He's the villain. And I remember I'd met Joseph Morgan socially. I was friends with his ex-girlfriend, and I met him, and I said, I called or actually Julie Pleckman and I were having dinner one night, and yeah, we're trying to cast the villain. I said, you know what? I don't know if this guy can act, but I got to tell you, I met this guy. He's an actor. And I got to tell you, I think he could be Klaus. And she's like, well, what's his name? I said, his name's Joseph Morgan. I was like, okay. Well, let me email casting. So she emailed casting, bring in Joseph Morgan. 2 weeks later, he had the part. So obviously he had to go in, audition, and kick ass. But I don't know if he would have auditioned if it weren't for me. So I'm going to pat myself on the back right there.
That is an unbelievable kismet that
Isn't
that
that crazy? Yeah.
so great because of course Elijah appears first.
Yeah.
Just when he first arrives, you see him,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
menacing, he's got
Oh
that
yeah.
coin, he tosses it at that window
I
and
have a
his
funny story to tell you. So
original.
I was shooting a TV series in Vancouver called Wolf Lake. And I was friends with a guy named Craig, and he was on the show, had like a recurring on the show. Anyway, we went to have lunch or dinner somewhere, I forget, and there was a waiter there. And he's like, oh, I'm friends with this guy. And the waiter was Daniel Gillies. I was not, this was 7 years or 8 years before the Vampire Diaries. And I talked to Daniel a little bit, and he's like, yeah, I'm from New Zealand. I just moved here. I want to be an actor. And then we started chatting. And I remember, it's funny, Daniel always brings this up. I ended up leaving him a big tip, and he always remembered that. And
Fortunately for you.
yeah, and I thank God, right? Thank God I didn't stiff him. But I remember he came on the show, and I had hung out with him a few times through my buddy Craig, and he came on the show. He goes, "You remember me? We hung out in Vancouver." I was like, "Yeah, man, good to see you." So it's just so funny. It's just like this bizarre small world. You know what I mean?
The 2 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
Hi, folks, and welcome to the Creation Entertainment Pop Culture Cinema Squad. And we have a very special episode this week. I'm Adam Malin, and joined by my esteemed cohorts. First of all, Superman expert Craig Byrne. Craig, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And also pop culture maven Bill Waters. Bill, welcome back, buddy.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you again.
For those of you that aren't aware, both Bill and Craig are valued members of the creation team. They're both experts in pop culture. And Craig, in particular, has been working with the Superman property for many years. He's got his own podcast and is a globally renowned expert in Superman. So it's a pleasure to have both you guys with us. If you'll indulge me, guys, I got a slew of questions. Craig, thanks for all the research that you've done on
Yeah,
this.
no problem.
And Superman, well, this is sort of in honor of the release of the new Superman film. Generally, it's getting very, very good marks, which is great. We all love James Gunn, and we're all rooting for Superman. So, but Craig, you can give as much about that when we get to it as you want to, without maybe spoiling too much. We begin our deep dive in Superman going back to 1938. Craig, I know that you know a bit about the early origins of the Superman character from creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Why don't you walk us through those humble beginnings a bit?
Well, I mean, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were two young guys from Cleveland who were trying for years to sell a Superman concept, and mostly for comic strips, and everybody turned them down, except for eventually National Periodical Publications. I think they were calling themselves that then, or what would become DC Comics. They bit, paid them a very small amount of money at the time. And Superman was the cover feature in Action Comics #1, which came out April 18th, 1938, coincidentally the day after my dad was born.
That's
So
awesome confluence. What is that book in mint condition currently worth today? Several million dollars.
Bill might know better than I do.
Yeah, for a really high grade piece, of which there's less than a handful, you're talking well north of 2.5 to 3.5 million.
But that comic book featured the first appearance of Lois Lane as well, who I feel to be just as important to the Superman story as Clark Kent and Superman are, because, she's his foil. I think she's one of my favorite women characters in science fiction.
And also, honestly, an archetypal strong woman
Yeah.
who, for all those years ago, was very unusual and prescient, since obviously we know that women are at least the equal or superior of the genders.
Yes.
It's great that that women were getting their fair share in terms of Lois's character in the era. Now, how did that dovetail into Superman one?
The first issue of the Superman comic.
Yeah, yeah, it came out, I
Well,
guess, in 1940, right?
yes, Superman #1 was the first comic book dedicated to just one lead feature, one name feature, which is kind of cool. Came
Right.
out 10 cents. It expanded the origin story of Superman, which was only one page in Action Comics #1, his whole backstory. So a lot more of that was introduced. And I should point out that earlier, characters like Perry White and Jimmy and Kryptonite and even Superman flying were not even part of the story at first.
So
And
what
that's
was the original Superman one continuity for Superman?
Originally it was just a passing motorist, I believe, that found Clark, and he grew up in an orphanage or something like that. And then eventually, very early on, they added the Kents, though they couldn't agree on the names of the characters. Sometimes they were Sarah and Eben, sometimes John and Mary, I think. But, eventually we landed at Jonathan and Martha. I don't know why I said that name.
What were the scope of his powers initially?
He could fly fast. I believe
I
bullets
thought he
bouncing off
just started
him.
out by jumping.
Well, it is.
Oh, I meant jumping.
The
Sorry.
original
He
lines,
could jump fast.
leap tall building. So it was basically super jumper, and
Yeah.
only an exploding bullet, basically an artillery shell, could penetrate his skin. So that's kind of where things had started. Things like the heat vision and stuff like that didn't come until much later in the continuity.
So now I think that somewhere in the 40s there was also a radio show.
Yes, and that's where Kryptonite was first introduced, as well as Jimmy Olsen. I'm sure
Um,
Jimmy was created to be like a young character who can hang out with everybody, but Kryptonite, I believe, was created because the voice actor for Superman, Bud Collyer, had to take some time off. So they needed to give Superman a weakness.
Those of us of a certain age know Bud Collyer, I believe, was the host of To Tell the Truth. He was certainly a game show host in the 60s. So it was interesting to hear that he was the voice of Superman in the 40s.
And he was still doing it for decades in animation and radio. He was quite, you know, I mean,
Look,
he's the one that was faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. And the narrator on that one was Jackson Beck, the one who first coined the faster than a speeding bullet. And he
Nice.
was still doing voiceovers through the 80s and 90s,
amazing.
which is
Now,
pretty cool.
so many of us that are into, sci-fi, fantasy, animation, all those genres, look very kindly on the 1941 Max Fleischer animated series. It was a gorgeous looking thing and really well executed. Tell us a little bit about Max Fleischer Studios, and the early Superman cartoons.
Well, I believe some of the animation in that was rotoscoped, which was well ahead of its time. And it's incredible that in the year 2025, you can watch these and feel like you're watching something brand new. It was very dynamic, it was very exciting. And I think when people think of classic 1940s Superman, that is the image they get with the black background on the S and that sort of thing.
For fans that aren't familiar with the term rotoscoping, which was also used by animators as late as the 80s, Ralph Bakshi in his Lord of the Rings film, rotoscoping is a way of creating animation using actual live action filmed content that is then rendered into a high contrast line form that can then be colored into to essentially create colored animation cells out of live action footage that has been rendered in high contrast line. I think I got that right.
I believe you did.
So anyway, around 1948, I believe, we had our very first Superman movie. Tell us a little bit about the first Superman film.
Well, actually, the very first things in 1948 were released by Columbia Pictures, and it was a movie serial. Serials were basically
Serial.
yeah,
Yeah.
movie serials are kind of like early TV, in that, kids got a 10-minute or so adventure. It would be to be continued, and then, it would have a cliffhanger, pick up where it began. And that first one lasted 15 chapters and 224 minutes, but it was called simply Superman. Kirk Allen played the
Great
Man of
Kurt
Steel.
Allen, yeah.
And then Noelle Neal was the first actress to play Lois Lane, and she'll come up again.
It's fascinating that actually Noelle originated the role,
Yes.
to have it taken away from her, much as Julie Andrews lost My Fair Lady, the movie, to Audrey Hepburn. I don't know how Noelle must have felt when they actually cast Phyllis Coates. Do you know anything about that story?
I don't, but I think I know where I could find the answer. Ed Gross, who you possibly know because he
Yeah.
works with Mark Altman, who's a part of our Trek show. Ed wrote this fantastic book called Voices from Krypton, which is an oral history with a lot of old interviews, including some vintage stuff from the 50s. And we may have heard what Noelle Neal thought of the whole switch to Phyllis Coates and back.
Now, how often would a serialized movie episode come out? Any idea? Was that every week, every month?
Do you
They
know,
would
Bill?
they would usually do it around every month and a half. Kind of works, depends on what the cadence was. Because like say Columbia was doing main film releases, they'll tag it to the front of their films. So instead of like as many trailers as we get now, there'd be the ubiquitous newsreel of the day, and then there'd be a couple of serials, and then you go into your main feature. And so they would kind of go with the cadence of it, but generally figure about every month or so, a little bit less.
And it's so crazy because serialized filmed content still continues like 70, 80 years later,
Yeah.
albeit streamers these days. Either they'll drop a whole season at once, which I hate, by the way, or they will serialize it to, let's say, they'll drop the first 2 or 3 episodes at the top, and then every week drop another episode. So of course, I think most of us prefer serialized rollout of film content. But
And
that
also,
the whole movie serialization of Superman is fascinating. And then I guess a couple of years later, there was a second serial.
yes, they did a second one. It was called Adam versus Superman. And in that one, Lyle Talbot played Lex Luthor.
Great Lyle
And
Talbot as Lex Luthor, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
yeah, and I also failed to mention that when they had Superman fly in the Kirk Allen serials, that was animation. Obviously, they didn't have visual effects techniques. I mean, that's one thing that's so clever. What came later with George Reeves, they found their own workarounds a lot of the time as well.
And we'll talk all about the great George Reeves. I grew up to him. I guess the first full-length Superman movie was around 1951.
Yes, Lippert Pictures released that movie, and that Kirk Allen and Noel Neill were out, and George Reeves and Phyllis Coates were Superman and Lois Lane, and I believe that was kind of like a test run for the weekly series that was about to premiere. And in fact, that movie is only about an hour long and could be split into two. I think it's called The Underground People or The Unknown People or something in the syndication package.
Those mole people, right? Those little
Yes.
midget mole people
Yeah.
with vacuum cleaners that were serving as like laser beams.
I mean, it's no different than a plunger being a laser beam on Doctor Who.
What year did Adventures of Superman the TV series first hit? If the movie was rolled out in 51, when did the TV series hit?
I believe it was in 52 or 53. I don't have that information right here handy, but
Black and white, right?
the first season was in black and white. The stories were a lot darker than what came later. There were a lot more gangsters, and it was probably a little more violent. And I know Phyllis Coates was considered to be a much harsher Lois Lane than Noel Neill was. I personally love how harsh she was, but I could see where children probably cared for Noel Neill more.
Because as you get older, you really start to appreciate Phyllis's performance.
Oh, yes.
When I was a kid, I thought she was nasty.
Uh-huh.
And when I grew up, I said, no, wait a second, she's a really determined, got her head on straight lady. I think history will show that both Phyllis and Noelle were sensational actresses who both brought their own spins to the character.
I agree completely. And it's also interesting that first season didn't have as much Jimmy Olsen as the later years did, because Jimmy became kind of a phenomenon in himself. And I mean,
Yeah.
DC Comics at that time eventually were giving Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen their own comic book series. So
The great Jack Larson.
yes.
And so, I mean, those of us of a certain tender age grew up with Superman, and or the syndication of Superman, which I did in the 60s. I mean, it ran from 52 to, I guess, about the time that he passed. And I've got a great George Reeves death story, but the series ran for 6 to 7 seasons.
I think it was only 5 seasons, but I think it went through 57 maybe.
7,
And
yeah.
they were thinking about doing more when Reeves passed away. Is how I
So,
understand it.
okay, in the early 70s, when Gary, my partner Gary Berman, and I started running, well, we started, as most of you know the legend, we started with our comic book shows in 1971 and always loved Superman as a quintessential character. In the late 70s, we had Bob Shea, who played Inspector Henderson on The Adventures of Superman, at our show. And I was actually backstage with Bob, and I said, to Bob, well, you obviously knew George really well. That's a horrible tragedy how he killed himself. And Bob shook his head, puts his eyes down and says, no way, boy, that man was killed.
Oh.
What? And he says, yeah. When Bob actually went to the crime scene, was asked to go to the crime scene, and he said that this place where George supposedly killed himself was riddled with bullet holes all over the room. It was not, at this time, the fact that it actually was probably a gangland conspiracy was not really well known publicly. It was still, the official word was that he had committed suicide, but Bob Shea knew even back then that most likely George had been rubbed out by a criminal adversary. And for those of us that saw that excellent movie Hollywoodland, that I thought Ben Affleck did such a great job as George Reeves, kind of know the story. He got on the wrong side of his girlfriend's boyfriend or ex-boyfriend. For guys like me growing up in the 60s, he was a huge inspiration, incredible portrayal. very charismatic, very sympathetic character. He's a very tragic personality actor-wise. I don't think he ever felt that people took him seriously. But if he were still alive today, I think he would finally come to understand how treasured he was and the value of his performance, that millions of us were inspired and loved him, and that he should have not discounted the amazing contribution as an actor and the character that he created.
I think a big representation of how loved he was, which is also one of my favorite things that he did. I know I'm getting a bit lighter on this, is when he guest starred on I Love Lucy. And all Ricky wanted for his birthday is for Superman to come to his birthday party. It's one of the funniest TV episodes I've ever seen. And
Awesome.
there's a bit where Superman asks Ricky how long he and Lucy have been married. And Ricky's like, oh, 10 years. And Superman's like, and they call me Superman. And it's just, it's really, like, I highly recommend watching that episode just for an idea of how the public viewed Superman as a fictional character.
You might
I,
be able to find it on YouTube or
um, I know it's on Paramount Plus for sure,
okay.
but, and DVD, but I feel like, at the same time as that being wonderful, I do think it's a little reductive that even that episode, I don't think it said guest starring George Reeves as Superman. They said guest starring Superman. And that's kind of, I mean, I know the early Kirk Allen movies only billed him as Superman,
Yeah,
but
I can see why you would say that. Yeah, that's
yeah,
well, no actor wants to be diminished by their role.
right.
Those of us that love their character don't do that. We don't diminish them. We're grateful for the great work that they did. Anyway, let's move on to the swinging 60s. And we had DC Comics and Marvel Comics now starting to be locked in this eternal battle between the two companies, with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby doing the Marvel style, and DC and Mort Weisinger doing the golden age of comics at DC, which themselves were a different kind of a vibe, but also fantastic. Can you kind of set up that comic book milieu for Superman in the comic books at that period?
Well, I think that period was more known as a Silver Age of comics.
I'm so sorry. Silver Age. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Silver Age. Yeah.
But you know, he built that world. So, Superboy had been introduced in 1949 before all this. But now suddenly there's a Supergirl, a Super Monkey, a Super Dog. There's the Bottle City of Kandor, Brainiac. You have all these aspects. So suddenly what is Superman and Krypton becomes this huge sprawling thing. Also during that era, I mentioned Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane got their own comics. Jimmy's often would put him in fantastical situations, like he's a giant dinosaur boy this episode, or this issue, or the time Jimmy switched with Superman. But
The Silver Age is sometimes
yeah.
accused of having somewhat frivolous storylines, but I found them
At
very
DC,
endearing.
yes.
But I still found them very endearing.
Oh yeah, and the covers. I mean, I know this was probably an edict from up above, but the covers would make you want, like, if you see a cover of like The Flash where his brain is all big or something, you want to know what's happening in that comic.
That's great.
So I mean, that was a really important age for the comics. I know,
Yeah.
by the early 70s, Julius Schwartz took over,
Who was
and
great.
it took a more realistic approach where Clark became a reporter for WGBS, news reporter on
Right.
camera. And that was cool, but I do know some people missed the classic Daily Planet and
Yeah.
yeah.
Somewhere during this period, also Filmation, the company Filmation did an animated series.
Yes, The New Adventures of Superman.
What can you tell us about that?
I believe Crypto was in it. Am I correct, Bill?
Yeah.
And how was the animation, or was it the usual Filmation style where they recycled a lot?
Yeah,
they did where they could. Yeah, because it was
Okay.
always
pretty
like
second rate.
Yep.
But I mean, it's still cool that it existed. But I mean, for most people my age, at least, and maybe both of you, Super Friends was the Superman cartoon. That was Hanna-Barbera.
That was actually really good because I'm a Hanna-Barbera fiend.
Yeah.
the stuff that they did. I mean, Johnny Quest, the Herculoids. I mean, Jetsons and you
Hmm.
Flintstones and that Hanna-Barbera had it going on. So Super Friends, two
Yeah.
thumbs up.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
amazing.
I mean,
I love that series.
the first time I ever saw a Superman origin story was in an episode of Super Friends.
That's awesome.
So,
Do you know anything about the ill-fated 60s Superman musical? It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman.
well, Jack Cassidy played the villain, which is interesting because his son played the Mirror Master on the original Flash TV show.
Interesting.
His other son was Lex Luthor's son on Lois and Clark and Lana Lang's true father on Smallville. And then his granddaughter, Katie Cassidy, was Black Canary on Arrow.
That's
So,
awesome.
I love that lineage.
yeah, there's a whole lineage to it. It's funny to me also that even though the play did not last that long, I know they did a TV adaptation in the mid '70s, but some of the music was so memorable that when I was growing up and my parents were watching the news on WDVM, it was called Channel 9 in Washington D.C. Their theme for the news was the Superman overture
That's awesome.
from, and it's just interesting to me how connected it all was. So that I mean it's cool that it existed, I guess I would say.
Yeah. And against all that backdrop, we had the inspiration for finally Superman really coming to the big screen in a huge way with Richard Donner's first Superman film. What year was that?
78, I believe. Yeah.
78.
78. All right, can you set that up for us, the origins of that film? And
Well, what's really interesting to me is that it's written by the Godfather's Mario Puzo,
incredible, incredible.
which is just kind of always blows my mind when I see it in the credits.
And by the way, if you have a Marlon Brando as Jor-El and Mario Puzo writing it, and Marlon from The Godfather, is there any kind of connectivity, or is that just 2 degrees of separation?
I don't know if that was intentional, but I believe both Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman were billed ahead of Christopher Reeve in the credits for that
Crazy.
first one because he was mostly unknown.
Yeah.
But what that movie did, I mean, again, granted, I was a baby when that movie came out, so I didn't see it at the time. But it seems that to a lot of people, you were truly seeing Superman fly for the first time. I mean, yes, George Reeves flew sideways, but you see, exactly. But the way they did it and the way that you could believe these people were their characters, it's very fascinating to me. On the DVD or Blu-ray of Superman the movie, they have the Lois Lane auditions, and there's some great actresses in there, but Margot Kidder is the only one who looks at him with childlike wonder.
She killed it. By the way, just as long as one last note about George Reeves, when he
Yes.
would take off to fly, George is like a very athletic dude. The poor guy would have to literally run and then jump out of frame,
Uh,
and then he would, I guess, like fall onto a mattress or something.
yeah.
But I used to love George Reeves' Superman takeoffs. I'm just saying.
Well, Lois and Clark, the Superman TV show of the '90s with Dean Cain,
Yeah.
did something similar. If they didn't want to show him speeding off, they would just have Dean Cain take his cape and be like, whoosh, off camera.
And that's your screenwriting.
Let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that first Superman movie. What was it that made it so special?
Do you want to start with that, Bill?
Christopher Reeve. I think it's a little bit. You got a number of things. One, that score. That musical score still, all these years later, there's a reason why those notes keep strumming even throughout this latest Superman movie.
John Williams, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that kind of orchestral lift to it, and it bursting on screen and seeing Krypton, even with all of the eccentricity with Brando, which I have to comment, I remember a thing. He was the highest paid actor at the time because he got $12 million for 12 minutes of screen time between episodes 1 and 2 both. And everyone's like, good heavens. But as far as that thing, when it hit, everyone's like, oh my God, this is a comic movie. And since DC at the time, and for a while was a little bit more lighthearted. It wasn't like heavy, gritty drama. And so that very much fit into that sort of vibe. And so people got what they were hoping for. And Christopher Reeve just embodied that Superman. And Margot Kidder, for the longest time, was my favorite, journalist Lois Lane era, because she had the right kind of gravitas. She was the right age. She was, that she could be this Pulitzer winning journalist.
Well, I think that's one thing that really worked with the movie. Yes, there were silly moments like with Lex Luthor and Otis, especially, but I mean, Ned Beatty and Gene Hackman were so much fun in this. It's Miss Tessmacher was a lot of fun. And of course, John Williams' music, just underscoring their scenes, just made them more whimsical.
Yeah.
But I think a thing that, touching upon what Bill said, I think a thing that worked with the movie is that it was taken seriously. It wasn't like we're doing, I mean, I love the Batman 60s series, but we're not doing a silly parody. We are doing Superman, and we're just going to see the planet Krypton, and they're going to be this weird alien race that all wears glowing white outfits. And,
and you have Richard Donner, who is a very distinguished director.
Oh, absolutely. You could tell that the actors really had a bond with Donner as their director. And I mean, Jackie Cooper is Perry White. Mark McClure is such a just enthusiastic Jimmy Olsen. I thought that was very true to what Jack Larson gave us in the 50s.
Yeah, for sure. He got the Larson vibe going on.
And we did get a Kirk Allen cameo on the train with young Lois.
Yeah, it's Lois when she's looking out going, there's a man running. That's where they name drop in the later edition. The original theatrical, they don't mention the name, but later on.
So the executive producers, Ilya and Alexander Salkind, I take it that between Superman and Superman 2, there was a kind of a falling out with Richard Donner because, or at least into the early portions of making Superman 2. Do you know anything about that story?
Well, they were originally intending to shoot Superman 1 and 2 back to back with Donner directing.
Right.
And I think the Salkinds had a certain way of working, maybe to a certain budget. I don't know exactly what that was, but there were cracks in their relationship with Donner. So they brought in Richard Lester, who I believe they worked on The Three Musketeers with.
Lester was a talented director too.
Oh, I agree. And he took over Superman 2, and it's interesting because the Lester portions were filmed so much later that people weighed different, had different hairstyles, and some people did not come back. Like Gene Hackman did not return. So like when you get that fortress scene in Superman 2, they just drop Lex because they don't want to have to deal with him for the rest of the scene, which is kind of funny. Which you don't realize when you're younger and watching the movie, but once you hear the behind the scenes story, they did eventually release as close to a Donner cut as we'll ever get in 2004 or so. And it's fun to watch. And I mean, it feels like you're getting new Christopher Reeve era Superman.
Which is the cut, do you think?
I mean, I think both have their advantages because, for example, the Lester cut, he wasn't able to use any of Marlon Brando's stuff.
Right.
So they had to reshoot that with Susanna York, who played Lara.
Right.
And who's Superman's Kryptonian mother. And so in the Donner cut, they got the rights to Marlon Brando's likeness and all that, which may have opened the door to use him in Superman Returns, some of that unused footage.
That's really cool. Then my own recollection is that Superman 3 kind of started to trivialize a little bit. It really wasn't as strong as the first two. Can either of you guys comment on that?
It's silly. Like with Richard Pryor as Gus Gorman. So they definitely were leaning towards the comedy. I mean, Pryor, I think, had recently done the movie The Toy, which was fairly popular. I personally kind of love Superman 3 because it's silly. And it has Annette O'Toole as Lana Lang. And of course, I love Annette.
Annette O'Toole as Lana Lang was pretty great.
And Robert Vaughn was a villain in that one, too, from The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
On Man from U.N.C.L.E., of course.
Yeah, and they had a Superman versus Superman fight, which is always an interesting thing to see. So there were advantages to the movie, but it was not as good as the first two.
No. And what happened with Superman 4?
It was just bad. I've actually never finished Superman 4.
Right.
Mostly because The writing is kind of cheesy. I feel like Margot Kidder missed a lot of the movie and was replaced by Mariel Hemingway.
Interestingly, John Cryer plays Lex Luthor's nephew, Lenny.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't John go on to play Lex Luthor in a future iteration?
Yes, he does on Supergirl and in the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover. And he was really good as Lex Luthor
I
too.
love John Cryer. He's awesome.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
like I think some people underestimated like, oh, it's Alan from Two and a Half Men, but that's not who he was playing. I mean, his Lex was a little unhinged and I feel like we've been blessed with a lot of good Lex Luthor actors in recent years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then we had a kind of a hiatus on Superman films for quite a few years.
Yeah, I mean, Warner Brothers kept trying in the 90s. They had Kevin Smith famously do a draft called Superman Lives,
Wasn't
which
there around 1988 another animated series?
there was by Ruby Spears. It was pretty good, but it
Yeah.
just didn't make an impact. It lasted only 13 episodes, I
There
believe.
was a Salkind Supergirl film,
Yes.
Yes.
Helen Slater, which was a pretty memorable
Yeah.
film. Helen was pretty great.
Yes, she was great. I'm not sure about the script of the movie,
Yeah, the
but
script was, but Helen was very
yeah.
memorable.
Kind of like how Christopher Reeve looks like he jumped out of comic book page. Helen Slater was the same, and she still looks great today.
Yeah, and a great actress too.
Yeah, she is a great actress.
There was also a Superboy TV series.
Yes, it was filmed for 4 seasons in Florida. It followed Superboy in college. First season, John Haymes Newton played Superboy, and then he asked for more money, and they used the excuse of a DUI as a reason to get rid of him. So then Gerard Christopher played him for the final 3 seasons. Stacey Haydock was Lois Lane, or not Lois Lane, Lana Lang. Wow, I really meant to say Lana Lang. But people like David Nutter got their start doing episodes of that, and he of course directed the Smallville pilot years later in the Supernatural.
David Nutter is known as the guy that you get to direct your pilots.
Basically, yes.
He is the go-to guy to start off the tone of a series. You always get him to film season 1, episode 1 of a show, and he's worked on dozens of shows, and he's one of the quintessential directors.
That's the most perfect description one could say about him.
And it's true, and I hugely respect the guy. 1992 brought Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman.
And the timing of that is really interesting because 92 is when they killed Superman in the comic books. They had gotten the characters engaged, and they're like, how are we going to delay this? Because we have this TV show coming up. And one of the creators at that time is like, why don't we just kill the guy? And so they did, and it was a phenomenon, and it sold so well. And then they did the Return comics, which introduced characters like the Connor Kent Superboy and Steel and Eradicator character and the Cyborg Superman.
Yeah.
So you had 4 of them, and then the real Superman came back. But it was the fall of 93 where Deborah Joy Levine produced Lois and Clark for ABC with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, and that was like a sexy moonlighting take on Superman.
Yeah, I mean, they were both fantastic.
Yeah, they were both fantastic, and especially that first season, the writing was just top notch. And unfortunately, I think that was a show that the network and DC interfered with a little too much, because suddenly the characters were dating for 2 weeks and they're like, we need to get them married. And so there was a whole thing with frog eating clones and all that, and it got a bit silly. And I mean, I remember being on set when I was 17 years old, hearing Terry Hatcher complaining about how long the story arc was going for, which is really funny in retrospect.
Rumor has it that there was a Kevin Smith script floating around that Kevin was trying to develop a film.
Yeah, I touched upon that earlier. It was called Superman Lives. That one had a lot of crazy notes from Warner Brothers, like they wanted a giant spider and all kinds of silly things, which Kevin has done numerous appearances where he will tell that story of the development of the movie. And I think there's a documentary about it as well.
It's interesting. So somewhere around the turn of the millennium, Warner Brother executive Peter Roth, who is actually a pretty legendary film executive in general, was developing a Superboy series, and he brought in a couple of showrunners slash writers, brilliant guys, Alfred Goff and Miles Millar, to develop what became Smallville.
Well, what's really interesting is the original deal Warner Brothers Television had was for a young Bruce Wayne series by Tim McCann-Lees, who wrote The Iron Giant.
Oh, that
And at some point, the Warner Brothers movie people said, no, you can't have Batman. So then that's when Peter Roth chimed in. It's like, I've always wanted to see a Superman series ever since I was at ABC or somewhere 20 years ago. And so he recruited Alan Miles, who I owe everything to. Like with my website, Krypton site, it would not have existed without them pretty much. And so, they're wonderful. And they came up with a version of the story that's Clark Kent growing up in Smallville. No flights, no tights. And even though the show ended up going for 10 seasons, I don't think that was Alan Miles' original plan. Um, so
Didn't
yeah,
they stop? Didn't they pull out of showrunners at some point?
yeah, they left after season 7.
Seven, yeah.
But I think some of that also had to do with the show's move to the CW from WB.
Yeah.
Because the executives at the CW just wanted to kill the show, and it still lasted for like 5 more years.
Just as a side note for the fans that aren't aware, Al and Miles became go-to writers for Tim Burton. And
Yes.
a lot of work for him on the Beetlejuice films. They are the writers and showrunners of the Wednesday TV series that's on Netflix that's so fantastic. They've done a lot of work with him, and that combination of those three is incredible how they catalyze each other on such creative projects.
Well, I think Alan Miles have a talent on how can we make this concept work as a weekly series. I mean, yes, their movies are great too, don't get me wrong. But in the case of Smallville, it's like, how do we build this world? In season 1, they had the Meteor Freaks, as they would call it. And it was a bit episodic, but it got you to know the characters in their world. And, focus, and without having a costume or flying around, you got to know the characters more, like Clark. And I mean, I feel like there is a generation that knows those versions best. And it's interesting to hear Nicholas Hoult and David Cornsweet, the new Lex Luthor and Superman, talking about, oh yeah, I totally grew up watching Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum.
Yeah, let's bore down on some of those actors. They're so great. Let's start with the great Tom Welling, whom we adore.
Tom came into the show not wanting to know Superman history. He wanted to learn as Clark did. And I think one of his absolute best moments in the entire series was season 2. It's an episode called Rosetta. And Christopher Reeve guest starred as a scientist who knew about his Kryptonian origins.
Right.
And Tom brought it. His acting opposite Reeve was so great. And you could tell the two of them had so much affection and respect for each other. And I feel like that was like the true passing of the torch in a way, because the two of them got along so well. And you haven't said the name yet, but with Michael Rosenbaum, he's the first person that, to me, that made Lex Luthor relatable. I enjoyed John Shea on Lois and Clark, but Rosenbaum, you saw how he became the damaged person he would become.
He was started off as a good guy.
Yeah. Well, or he tried to be the good guy, but nobody would believe him. You know what I mean? Like, he'd do something good, but then everybody's like, well, you're a Luthor. We don't trust you. And Annette O'Toole returned to the Superman universe to play Martha Kent.
Yeah.
She is the sweetest person ever, if anybody gets to meet her.
Can you talk about the Supergirl casting?
An AI version of Jor-El was involved. And proto-Kara type character, played by Adrienne Palicki, who's going to be at Salute to Smallville in
Who
September.
we also love.
She's wonderful, and she was great in the role. And I don't want to spoil the episode for those who have not seen it, but she is not the same Kara we end up meeting later.
Yeah.
But it's amazing they could put Supergirl in an episode. They were limited to what DC concepts that they could use, but slowly they got trusted more and more. So you saw a version of the Flash, you saw Aquaman, you got Cyborg, Green Arrow, and eventually like a little bit of a Justice League on the show.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, of course, Justin Hartley, who played Green Arrow, has gone on to be on Tracker to be a huge
Yeah.
star and celebrity. We actually had Justin 1,000 years ago when he was playing Green Arrow, and we knew even then that he was destined to be a huge top liner because the guy's incredible. But I think we should probably get Adrian and Laura on stage together. I think could be a pretty amazing matchup.
I think the reason we didn't this year is I believe Laura's getting married at that time.
I see. I see. Yeah.
But hopefully, I would love to see both of them together. I know when Creation did the Women of Sci-Fi recently, that I asked her the question. I was like, "Did they ever talk about bringing you back once Laura was Supergirl?" Because that would have been really interesting to see those characters interact. And so that was fun, and that's just another thing you get at these conventions.
Oh yeah, and I also want to mention the great James Marsters, whom I love. We all know him as Spike from Buffy. Did a great take on Brainiac.
Yeah, he did that right after Angel was done. He like jumped right over to Smallville, and originally he was Professor Fine from Clark's College. The show kind of forgot the college thing after about a half season,
Right.
but it was fun, and he would recur and come back. Even played Brainiac 5 eventually in a high school reunion episode in season 10.
Funny. I think most of the people that are watching this are Creation attendees or fans, but we're in our second year of the Smallville reunion shows that we're doing. This year we're going to be in
Chicago.
We're going to be in Chicago this year. Okay, at the Westin O'Hare in
Yes.
October.
September 13th to 14th, I believe.
And I think we're going to line up a huge amount of the cast and special guest stars.
And I know one of the hosts personally.
Actually, Craig, you will probably be our most preeminent host.
And Derek Russell from the Starkville House of L, Super House of L podcast will also be hosting.
A question I wanted to ask is, there was such a great online response last year after our Smallville event last year and the attendees that came. Craig, since you've been around that fandom for so long, was there something that kind of like really either was heartwarming or just really surprised you about the fandom itself and its relationship with Smallville?
Absolutely. There was so much positive energy at the convention. Like everybody who was there wanted to be there, and there was just so much love and appreciation. Also from the cast on the stage. Like they were putting it out there too. And it's like when the show was on the air 20 years ago, you had the shippers fighting, the Chloe, Lana, Lois people all fighting with each other, which was kind of...
Please stop.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, having had the largest forum for the show, I had to deal with all of that back in the day. So it was so nice to see the fans. I think they're just also happy because they're celebrating something that was from a particular time in their lives. I noticed a lot of the people were like mid-30s, so they're probably in their 20s when the show was on the air. And I really think it was a wonderful experience. I hope this year's does just as well so we can do something big next year for 25.
Now, in the middle of the Smallville TV series, Warner Brothers tried their shot on another Superman movie.
Yes. With Brandon Routh was Superman. Bryan Singer was the director.
Bryan Singer of X-Men movie.
Of X-Men fame. So this is right after the X-Men movies were huge.
Yeah.
That was like a big get back then. And I think, I had a conversation with Ned O'Toole about this one time. I think one thing that held that movie back, and I enjoyed that movie, don't get me wrong, but it felt like a microwaved version of the Donner movie. The opening titles were almost exactly like it. And I feel like Ralph also had the unfortunate position of being the first movie Superman after Christopher Reeve died.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate position to be put in.
I'm very happy for Ralph that he got to play Superman again in the Crisis crossover.
Which, by the way, those Crisis on Infinite Earth crossovers were really fantastic.
They were fantastic. And he wore the Kingdom Come suit from the comics. And it might be that he's finally old enough to play Superman because, he was very youthful looking. And Lois, Kate Bosworth in that movie looked 20, which didn't really make sense for Lois Lane at the time. So, so that was a thing. And Unfortunately, I don't think it did what Warner Brothers wanted it to do in the box office, so they
So
never got a
they
sequel.
tried about half a dozen years later. Zack
Yes.
Snyder came in and created his own Snyderverse version of Superman, Man of Steel, with
And
him.
this Yeah, and this is after Snyder had some big successes at Warner Brothers. I personally really like the Watchmen movie that he did about a
Fabulous.
couple of years before Man of Steel, and Henry Cavill was cast as Superman, and I know a lot of people loved him. Do you want to talk about what you love about those movies? Because I know you do, Adam.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that Zach is a great filmmaker. I love the look of those films. I love the take on Krypton. I just thought it felt like science fiction. This beautifully realized alien world. It kind of made sense what was happening there. The odyssey of this orphan infant to Earth felt very plausible and beautifully visually realized. I mean, it was just incredible to watch that happen. I also really loved Henry. I thought he made a very, dashing and well-focused Superman. Tone, I mean, everybody has their own tone that they like, but I really liked what Zach did a lot. I also really enjoyed Batman v Superman. I thought that was really great. I love that. And I also loved the storyline that they were developing for the Nightmare, Knightware, which was an alternate reality in which Superman it does go rogue and comes under the influence of the great, and I do mean great, dark side. They took this concept further on in the Justice League. Now, of course, just for those that don't know the story, they went from Batman v Superman. They were developing the Justice League characters, and Zach started, going into production and filming the Justice League film when he had a horrible tragedy, a loss of one of his kids.
Hmm.
And he pulled out of production, and the great Joss Whedon took over. Now, I admire Joss a lot. Firefly, Serenity, Buffy. Joss is a great filmmaker. I think that, he was at a disadvantage taking over the Justice League project. And I thought the finished film was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Years later, during the pandemic, of course, Zach had a chance to, well, refilm like a whole half a movie's worth of content and release it in four, I believe, 1 hour segments for HBO in the Snyder Cut. I thought it was sensational. And one of the things that I loved about it the most is because everybody knows I'm the world's #1 Fantastic Four and Jack Kirby fan. Most of you know that Kirby left Marvel and went to DC, where he created the New Gods mythology, which was fantastic. And his greatest creation, as far as I'm concerned, while over at DC, was the great villain Darkseid, a villain so deadly and powerful, he wanted to nullify all life in the universe, which may seem like a familiar trope, but in any event, this character had the goods. I really thought that Zach finally brought justice to Darkseid on the screen and brought in that whole continuity. And the nightmare was supposed to dovetail into something coming out of Justice League One that would either be Justice League 2 or a spin-off movie in which we would have explored again if Superman did indeed go rogue, which is, feared in Batman v Superman. What would happen if Superman goes rogue? It's a terrifying thought, which of course is explored in great comic detail in The Boys, which we all love, and of course, Homelander sort of is a comedic, horrifying iteration of what would happen if Superman went rogue. Well, the whole nightmare, alternate reality where Superman does indeed go rogue, and it's the end of the world as we know it, with Batman, a series of freedom fighters trying to fight against impossible odds against Superman, who is arguably has godlike powers. That potential future alternate or either a multiverse storyline that never got realized, but maybe one day will, was, I think, what Zach was leading up to that could have been an incredible creation, but never quite came to be. So all those things about what Zach brought to the Superman and the Justice League mythos, I thought was amazing. Having said that, I understand it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I definitely bow to Zack Snyder. I mean, the 300 movies, a lot of the stuff that this guy has done. He's such a talented and imaginative filmmaker, and I thought he brought his own special stamp to those couple of Superman films.
And I think I should point out for anybody who's listening to this or watching us on YouTube, you and I had a great discussion about the works of Jack Kirby here on the Creation Entertainment podcast, and that exists on our archive if you visit our website.
Thank you. Want to talk a little bit about the Supergirl TV series?
Yes. So that was developed by Greg Berlanti, who had also done Arrow and the Flash at that point.
Greg arguably was sort of the
Yeah.
James Gunn of television DC
DCTV. Oh,
universe.
yeah.
Yeah.
And instead of the CW, it was developed for CBS. So they had a bigger budget. They shot season 1 in LA. You had big actors like Callista Flockhart played Cat Grant so perfectly. And Melissa Benoist was a very earnest and kind Supergirl. Her Earth parents were played by Helen Slater and Dean Cain, who we've mentioned earlier. And they introduced new characters like her sister Alex. The first season, it did well ratings wise and creatively, but CBS didn't want any more. And so the CW picked it up for season 2. And that's when they brought in their own Superman, which we'll talk about later. But they really continued that mythos, and the show lasted for 6 seasons, including the 6th season, which Melissa wasn't even in every episode.
Now, Melissa was an alumni of Ryan Murphy and Glee, was she not?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was really known for some movies she had done as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was one of those people that, especially impressing children, you could tell she was really into the role. And, you know, that show brought in some concepts for better or for worse, like Mon-El, Brainiac 5, a character named Dreamer, who is based on Dream Girl from Legion of Superheroes. You had the Legion show up at some point. And eventually they got their own Lex Luthor and John Cryer, who we've mentioned before. But yeah, the season 2 premiere, the first episode in the CW, introduced Tyler Hoechlin as Superman. And he played the role in crossovers for several years. Elizabeth Bitsy Tulloch played Lois to his Superman. And
now, let's just mention that
yes,
Tyler, we knew from Teen Wolf.
Yes.
And Bitsy, we knew from Grimm.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
So, and I know Creation used to do Teen Wolf conventions, correct?
Did a couple of Grimm events too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And love Tyler and love Elizabeth Bitsy Tulloch. Yeah.
Yeah, they're both great.
Great actors. Great actors.
And eventually, after they appeared in a few crossovers, somebody at the CW was like, we need to give them their own show.
Yeah.
And so they developed a show in which they were parents of 2 teenagers themselves.
Great concept.
And, you know, that was a version of Superman we hadn't really seen before.
Superman and Lois.
Yeah. So
that was 2021?
2021 until last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they
also aborted prematurely, I think.
Oh, it was. But I mean, I understand there were so many factors that led to the show ending when it did. One major one was the writer's strike of 2023. I mean, there was like a year between seasons 3 and 4. And so that was a big thing. And also the CW got bought out. So, I mean, the CW
by the way, the whole Nexstar buyout of CW ruined that network.
Yep.
I mean, CW was an incredible incubator of genre, fantasy, sci-fi show concepts that not only were imaginative, but for better or for worse, imaginative. They were great catalyzers for young, up-and-coming writing, directing, acting talent. It's really a shame what happened to the CW, in my opinion.
Well, also, we're talking about fandom, and of course, you know fandom very well. A network like the CW allowed something like Supernatural to be on 15 seasons, as long as they still had stories to tell, and they kept telling so many stories. And now Creation has a whole Supernatural tour. where the fans get to meet these actors and they really had time to build those characters, whereas now I feel like anything that's made for young adults does 6 episodes a year every 3 years.
Well, of course, the whole world of streaming is a completely
Yeah.
different universe now. It's changed a lot,
Yeah.
but I'm still grateful to the streamers. They
Oh,
have
yeah.
become the new great incubators of creative concepts.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think, Amazon and Netflix, those kind of entities, to their credit, do spend big money on creative risks. So I am a fan. I am a fan of those streamers, even though, as you say, content is parsed out a little less liberally than it used to be in a CW platform where you could get 20 or 22 episodes of a great show in a year. Of course, that also takes its toll on the actors, as Jensen and Jared will be the first to tell you.
Oh, totally. But I think it's very interesting that some of these really good streaming shows now are coming from people who got their start on the CW. You mentioned Al Goff and Miles Miller for Wednesday. We also have Eric Kripke, who created Supernatural, who has the Boys universe. And I
And
know
Vought Rising,
what?
Vought Rising. Well, there's a Soldier Boy spinoff with the great
Yes.
Jensen Ackles, Vought Rising, that we're going to see in the next couple of years.
And
So
we're gonna get Misha Collins and Jared guest starring on The Boys next season, so you'll get a little Supernatural reunion there.
almost
And
terrified to see what they're going to do with those poor guys after what with Rob Benedict. Oh my
oh
God.
no, well, what about Alex Calvert on Gen V? What they did to him?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it all, I mean, really, what Kripke has brought to Prime Video is like a more mature version of what Berlanti brought to the CW.
and also a huge cautionary tale as well about people with meta powers. Our time is running short.
Yes,
I wanted
sorry.
to touch a little bit. No, this is awesome. You kidding me? I love so, there's a series that's close to both of our hearts. Bill, probably you too. Sci-Fi developed a series called Krypton.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that show had my favorite versions of Brainiac, Zod, and Doomsday ever to be in live action.
But first of all, Brainiac reminds me of Galactus from Fantastic Four 2.
Yes. He just looked so cool. He had the green skin and
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
like I just thought the show was very well designed. It's interesting. It was originally developed by David Goyer and meant to take place in the same universe as the Snyder films.
And I just want to say David Goyer is
Yeah.
a visionary. What he's done with Foundation
Oh, yeah.
on Apple TV, one of the greatest sci-fi TV shows of all time. So the great David Goyer, having developed that, comes as no surprise to me.
There's an alternate version of the pilot that a trailer leaked for at one point that has a lot of the original concepts visible. And then they reworked it and they added Adam Strange and a time travel,
Yeah.
aspect, which is cool. I've always wanted to see Adam Strange in live action.
Yeah. I
And
just didn't expect him to just be a normal guy, kind of.
yeah. But what also worked for me was Cameron Cuff, who played the lead in the show. And
Great.
what blew my mind about him is finding out he had been a Superman fan for many years before he had the role. And in fact, I saw him at Warner Brothers party one time, and I said, "How you doing?" And he goes, "Hi, Craig. How are you?" And I'm just like, "How do you know my name? My name tag's turned around." He's like, "Oh, I used to visit Krypton site back in the day," and that was just so trippy.
Thank
Like,
Your site is the bomb, man. Everybody loves your site.
oh, I appreciate that, but it just was so like I honestly do wonder if David Cornsweet, Nicholas Holt, being fans of Smallville, checked out the site back in the day.
Wouldn't surprise me. Now,
Yeah.
not too long ago, we had the ill-fated Black Adam movie, of course, The Rock. And at the end, there's an Easter egg in which we see Henry Cavill is back as
Yes.
Superman, purporting that they might meet together again. What happened?
Well, I don't know exactly what happened aside from James Gunn being installed, but it's really frustrating because soon after that, Cavill did a post on social media saying, "I'm back as Superman."
He did.
So people got really excited, and then maybe less than a year later is when DC announced they were going to start fresh again with James Gunn
A
and Peter
reboot. Yeah.
Safran. And so, and Gunn wanted to do something new with a new actor, which I completely understand and respect.
Yeah.
But I do think it was a bit mean of Warner Brothers to dangle that carrot for the people who wanted more Superman of Henry Cavill. Because one issue, I know I didn't talk about my issues with the Snyderverse, but one issue I had is we never had a full just Superman movie after Man of Steel. We had to share with Batman and everybody else. And
We're setting up Justice League. Okay.
exactly.
Cool your horses. Cool your horses.
But I would have
I
loved
know.
to have seen just a Superman movie with Henry Cavill where he's got the glasses, he's Clark Kent.
Yeah.
Because the ending of Man of Steel showed so much promise for me. So that was a little bit of a bummer for some people, but yeah,
All
James,
right. So listen, James Gunn was installed,
yes,
and they've got a huge hit on
yes.
out now. What can you tell us about the film?
Well, first, I just wanted to point out that James Gunn did some of the most relatable Marvel movies in the Guardians. They really let him show his stuff.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that he would be given the keys to the DC universe. In this movie, I think one thing that really stands out with Corin Sweat as Superman is the feeling of hope and doing the right thing, which are core Superman traits to me. And he does what he does, maybe not based on any laws, but because it's right. And I think it's very interesting that Rachel Brosnahan, who is fantastic as Lois, challenges Clark on some of his decisions.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that she disagrees with him, but she's Lois Lane, and Lois Lane asks the tough questions. She just is so cool as Lois Lane. Jimmy Olsen gets a decent sized role. We see some other superheroes from what they call the Justice Gang, which is kind of like the old Justice League International comics with Guy Gardner being an idiot and
Nathan Fillion, you know.
Nathan
Great
Fillion is Guy
casting.
Gardner. Yeah.
Great casting.
So, and by the way, I mean, he's so awesome on The Rookie.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know Nathan from Serenity, Firefly, but I mean,
Yes.
to be Guy Gardner, who is such a kind of a doofy character, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean his
Hey.
hairstyle alone.
Yeah.
But so you have that, but I think the thing that's like cool is, we have Crypto in the movie, and it's like this is a Superman who loves the Earth. He loves Lois, he loves his parents, he loves his dog. And I
What
feel
a-
like that's so relatable and just wholesome in its own way. So I think Cornsett was great. I was a little disappointed. I'm spoiling. We do not get a shirt rip in the movie.
Well, I mean, you do that in front of the mirror every day, so we don't really need that.
That's true. But yeah, I thought it was really good. I think some characters were a little bit underused, like Perry White didn't really get much to do.
How's Nick Holt?
Um, he's a great actor. I thought he was a little underserved as Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen him on Skins and how evil he can be and some other things, and I didn't feel that scared of Lex. I don't know what you felt, Bill.
No, because his rage, when he gets angry, it's not that he gets comedic, but he doesn't drip the kind of menace that, say, Sutherland does as President Snow in
Yes.
kind of a thing, where he just
Oh, he's
really
great.
brilliant and evil. But again, in this case, Lex is good and he's a fine villain, but is he like really hyper scary? Not really.
No.
They're really going for the Musk on ketamine sort of vibe, and so we kind of get that, and so people bring their own kind of thoughts to that.
Well, guys, I think we should put a pin on it.
I
Love
should
that.
point out though, because I'll feel bad if I don't mention it. Edie Gathegi as
From
Mr. Terrific.
Twilight, right?
Yes, he is perfect. It makes me think, do we even need Batman in this universe when Mr. Terrific is so great? So ultimately, it was a good movie. I don't think it felt as epic as the Christopher Reeve film, but not many things are.
Well, guys, this has been an amazing pleasure and an honor, not only for me, for everybody that watches our show, to do this wonderful dive into Superman continuity and history and lore. It's been wonderful. I want to thank Bill Waters And I want to thank Craig Byrne. Please be sure you go to his website. Craig, your website address is?
Kryptonsite.com. It's kryptonite with an S in it.
And on behalf of these guys and myself, Adam Malin, thank you for watching this episode of Creation Entertainment Podcast, Pop Culture Cinema Squad.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Cheers,
everybody.
everybody.
See you soon.
See, now that was some
See,
Superman
right?
goodness. That was good
Right?
stuff.
It was the best. And Paul Wesley, oh,
I know.
he's the best too.
How
He's
can you
great.
not love him?
How can you not? How can you not?
Please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon for notifications, and if you're listening in, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We'd really appreciate that. And we will see you next time on the Creation Entertainment Podcast.
Bye-bye.